Good afternoon, Stefan, or should I say good morning to you in Texas today. Thank you
Good.
for joining me today for the third episode of International Expansion Explained.
It's my pleasure, Catherine. Nice to be here. Early in the morning for me.
Yeah, and for me, it's a comfortable after lunch kind of time. So, yeah, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's it. So, just for those people who don't know you, although I'm sure that a lot of people who are in the localization and international business industry have already come across you, especially on LinkedIn, a short introduction. So Stefan Huyghe is on a mission to help his customers reach their international potential at home, and he has over 20 years of experience working in the localization industry as an executive for various high-profile language services companies. Now, Stefan is a native Dutch speaker, originally from Belgium. He actually grew up in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. So whilst he was there, he went to an English-speaking school in German-speaking capital. That means that Stefan speaks all four of those languages fluently. So, to be honest, it's only fitting that he actually ended up in the localization industry promoting international business. And he's lived in several locations across the US, and he's a joint US and Belgian citizen. In 2021, he was elected to the Nimdzi Localization Influencer Watchlist. This is a list of the most prominent industry professionals with proven experience in the translation, localization, and globalisation industries. And to add onto the end of this wonderful description of all of his achievements, Stefan's also a regular contributor to magazine and frequently appears on industry podcasts. Wow, just listening to
Point,
that. Actually,
point in case you should become my agent. I'm telling you, I'll let you do an intro for me anytime.
okay, we'll talk about commission later. That's no problem. This is so maybe just to kick us off, you can tell us how actually did you get into international business? What drew you especially to localization as a niche, let's say?
So the connection with languages for me was a pretty easy one to make because, as you indicated, my background is full of languages. As a teenager, I ended up with my parents moving to Switzerland and living in the French part, going to school in the German part in English. So right out of the gate, that's how I learned to speak those languages and got fluent in them. And then in the early 90s, I ended up in San Francisco and was just getting settled there when a friend of mine, a French friend of mine, had gotten a job for a language service provider called eTranslate, later became translations.com. And they were just getting started. She had a conversation with me in which she said she was looking for somebody to help her out, starting up the French office of that company in Paris, and she needed somebody who spoke fluent English and French. And she proceeded to tell me she wasn't able to find somebody. And as I was sitting there having a beer with her at the counter, I thought, hey, this is maybe something I can help with. And a couple of weeks later, I was in Paris for 3 months, and the rest is history. I've been involved in the localization industry ever since. It wasn't necessarily by design. In those days, localization was not a very active industry yet either, but it just kind of came to be naturally because of my background.
Yeah, I can imagine because I also have a languages degree. And so at the end of that time, I was also faced with that decision of, okay, what do I want to do with that background? And for a variety of reasons, I fell into doing international business as well. So, yeah. I think that those kind of things are often the best. They often turn out to be the best for all of us in the end. They just things just fall into place.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, our main topic that we want to discuss today is about how the war in the Ukraine is affecting global business. And recently I watched the interview that you did with Katerina Ritz-Rakul and on her experiences about interpreting for President Zelensky, as well as I think you spoke with Maria Malikina and also with Tatiana Struk. All of them described their experience working under these testing psychological conditions. And Maria mentioned this upswing in the need for both Ukrainian and Russian language for military and humanitarian purposes. And that's certainly something that I'm seeing in Austria too, because there's quite a lot of refugees coming through who most of them don't have that good English and a lot of them don't have any German. So obviously you need somebody to help you communicate with them. How do you feel, or how have your interviews shown that the localization industry is being affected by the war in the Ukraine at the moment?
Yeah, I've interviewed several of those people over the last couple of weeks, and the last interview that I did was with Tatiana Struk. That's going to be released on multilingual media in the next couple of days, I think. And Tatiana runs a localization company in Lviv, Ukraine, called Linguistic Center. And she actually was super lucky, not by design, but a little bit by dumb luck. She delegated a lot of the project management of her team to currently be conducted in Poland, and that is enabling her to concentrate on helping with the refugee crisis on the ground. And of course, I think all these people confirmed to me that there's an acute need and uptick for translation services because of the refugee crisis. I think 10 million people or something like that have now fled their homes in Ukraine because of the Russian invasion. I think that was the number that I read on the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees press release. And all those people pretty much have legal translation needs. So that impact is immediate. In the long run, though, I think there's concern for both supply and demand of Ukrainian and Russian language services, of course, because economically they might be affected, or they're going to be affected, I could say.
For sure. And I think that this is something that at the moment it's really hard to gauge exactly to what extent that's going to have a long-term effect.
It'll depend a little bit. It'll depend a little bit how the war pans out. Is it going to be something that drags on for indefinitely, or is it something that's going to get resolved and things can go back to normal a little bit?
Yeah. Although, I mean, at the moment, I think that one of the things that is the kind of more immediate use of the language is this language in the form of propaganda, in the form of news reports, because this is simply one of the defining aspects of any, let's say, modern war. And I know that you've been also looking for multilingual, you've also been looking at some of the trends, or you've also been looking at some of the things which are to be observed in that aspect of language use as well, haven't you?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is this article that I wrote a couple of weeks ago about the significance of the Z symbol that we've been seeing on all this Russian military equipment. I'm sure you've seen it on TV, and it kind of illustrates again how, all languages use symbols that represent a classification, just like a name does. But these symbols' meaning can rapidly evolve, and the Russian Z launched during the invasion of Ukraine is a perfect example of such a dynamic language significance. It's actually originally it was a symbol that just helped the Russian troops, or I think that's kind of where it started. It was a symbol for the Russian troops to recognize each other and make sure that they weren't shooting or
shooting each other,
on one another, so to speak. But it's since evolved, and the Russian Ministry of Defense posted that the Z symbol is actually an abbreviation of the phrase "for the victory." I don't speak Russian, so I'm not going to try to say it in Russian, but it's for the victory that it stands, and the Putin regime now has further pushed that symbol as a sign of national pride, and so it's evolved in a pro-war symbol, and it all of a sudden represents this new Russian ideology and national identity. People are displaying it on cars. It's not maybe that well known in the West, but a couple of weeks ago in Moscow, they were having something called like a Z convoy, where cars would parade around and in support of the troops involved in the military operation in the Ukraine, and I saw reports that convoy stretched for 12 kilometers. So it's a really tricky situation, I think, because often in the West we get the impression that everybody is against the war, but apparently that's not really the case. And I think since a lot of Russians are cut off from our Western media, so to speak, they are being fed a completely different dialogue. Don't know whether you saw this Russian athlete too. There's a Russian athlete at the Apparatus World Cup in Doha who caused outrage by displaying the letter Z on the front of his outfit, standing on the podium next to his Ukrainian rival who won the gold. And so it's this letter Z has been a very interesting linguistic phenomenon that I noticed right away being active in the language industry, because I'm kind of in tune with that kind of thing and paying attention to it. I think somebody called it the swastika, which I thought was a questionable pun, so to speak, but right on target, maybe as to the description as to how it's being used.
For sure. I mean, it certainly seems to be this kind of, let's say it's a cheap populist trick, if you like, or a gag too, that started out with a practical usage has now become a symbol of almost like the branding of the whole kind of Russian nationalist movement supporting the war or supporting around Putin, hasn't it? It's
exactly,
yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that on both sides that there are also huge amounts of propaganda, and it's also very difficult to know what's really the true situation on the ground in terms of reporting and what's actually happened, and in terms of and damages and so on, that it's actually very, in any conflict zone, it's really difficult to actually get a true picture of what's going on the ground. And of course, language is at the forefront of those kind of discussions. But are you already seeing changes in the way that companies are thinking about their international business? I mean, for example, from here in Austria, a lot of Austrian companies are active in both the Ukraine and Russia. So they're major markets for us from here in Central Europe. I mean, Lviv or Lemberg, as it's called in German, used to be part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So there are also German speakers in that part of of the company. And of course, Austrian companies, European companies are being forced to consider focusing on different markets in order to replace that income, because Russia is often one of the biggest markets, if not the biggest.
I think in the long run, the biggest risk is an implosion of the demand for both Ukrainian and Russian. I'm now relating it directly to the language services industry, but it's economically, certainly for international business, the same risks exist, that with the sanctions shutting down the international Russian business and bombs destroying the Ukrainian economy, that whole section of Central Europe is going to be facing an uphill battle. And for the languages industry, without a market and or an economic benefit for companies to localize in those languages, it might be difficult to keep that going. As this conflict started, the language industry is pretty tight-knit. We have a lot of colleagues that we're in touch with via social media, and we communicate with, and our thoughts went out right away to the 30 to 50,000 translators and language professionals in the Ukraine as this conflict came to be. There are some initiatives that have been started in order to try to alleviate the situation. Not sure whether you are following what Jan Hinrichs is doing, the founder of Localunch, but he's been hard at work behind the scenes and came up with this idea to do a language pledge Ukrainian. And essentially, we've been soliciting big business to pledge to continue to do Ukrainian localization, regardless of whether there is an economical benefit to it or not. The idea being that some of these large companies, I'm thinking the Google and likes, the localization budget is so big that removing Ukrainian is a drop in the bucket for the company itself, but keeping it going is going to make a big difference in the long run for the linguists and language service providers that are affected by the dropping away of this economical market, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm sure
they
that
did
actually, sorry.
They did a concert, they did a benefit concert this weekend too. I don't know whether you saw that, but that was kind of along the same lines, in order to support the language services community in Ukraine. There was a concert that was organized on Sunday and raised $14,000
Cool.
just by having people volunteer and sing some songs on Zoom. So that was really great to see.
Yeah, I didn't actually watch that because there was also a benefit concert in Austria at the same time for the same cause. So yeah, I was watching elsewhere, as it were. I can still only watch in one place at one time.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that actually, I mean, the Ukrainian language is much more, let's say, endangered than Russian language, simply because the Russian language versions of a lot of companies' websites, they're actually also serving some of those small markets like Armenia, Kazakhstan, all of those countries. So probably the Russian language version is not in such danger of dropping off the map as the Ukrainian one will be, I would guess.
Yeah, it's going to depend on what role Russia is going to be playing in the international community going forward, and it'll probably depend on how quickly this conflict gets resolved as well, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting time. I think.
Yeah.
The main thing is that at the end of the day, that we have to come to an end to the war, and of course is hoping that will be sooner rather than later, although at the moment it's hard to actually imagine in what concrete form that will truly come about, and how that actually could look, or what needs to come, what needs to be the pre or any kind of or so on to actually hold. But I'm sure that the localization and translation industry will be a core part of any peace process once that begins. Or what would you say to that?
Yeah, the language industry, in my mind, has always served as a bridge between cultures and people. We are playing an important humanitarian role at the moment. For example, in your own United Kingdom, there's 6 organizations of language professionals that have come together to form the Ukraine Language Support Task Force in an effort to help Ukrainian refugees. And they created a series of translation templates for important documents to aid with refugees who arrive in the country and get settled. The templates can streamline the process of receiving a translation of documents such as, say, birth or marriage or divorce certificates, the documents that are important for individuals applying for a visa, through the new Ukraine family scheme that's brought forward by the UK government, I think, and it's allowing people from the Ukraine that can present those legal documents to stay for up to 3 years as refugees in the Ukraine. So, in that sense, we're playing our part in the immediate activities of the war, and we're hopefully bringing a positive contribution.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in this area, then anyone who can speak Russian or Ukrainian is kind of at a premium at the moment, because we have our local sports hall has, I think, 150 beds inside. Everything that, let's say, all of those kind of sports hall type facilities have been requisitioned for that purpose. And the Red Cross have a number of translators and interpreters working with them who were supporting refugees in doing all of those formalities, like you said, of registering and registering with the authorities, so that if necessary they can claim healthcare, they can send their kids to school if they need to, or they can, do anything else that they need to for arranging accommodation and everything that you need to actually stay in a country for a while. So
I really like this organizing of the templates by these 6 organizations in the UK, because one of the things that me and Tatiana talked about too is that now the demand has spiked, obviously, for language services right this moment, but it's also spiking at a moment where it's probably the toughest for any linguist to be working on these documents, because a lot of the people, even if they have fled and they're, say, in Poland or some other country, they're still psychologically affected by what's going on in their home country. And for those that are staying behind, they're sometimes doing the translations in a bomb shelter, waiting for the internet to come back on, or electricity. So there's certainly some complications along the way. And Tatiana was saying, if she can ask anything from the international community, is to, be patient and have some leeway in those situations, because obviously these are very dire circumstances under which these things are being completed.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I would say, unbelievable. Nobody expected that at the beginning of 2022, after 2 years of pandemic, that we would find ourselves in a war situation in the center of Europe. I mean, it's nobody expected that to come. I guess we'd all become rather complacent about the whole thing. So, and I think that also, to be honest, that the the international community has to look back a little bit at their history and also to think about, okay, how do they want to actually structure a final peace process, because they don't want to dig themselves a hole in the same way that they dug themselves a hole after World War I with all of those treaties like Versailles, Saint-Germain and Trianon. You know,
it's a very complex situation.
It certainly is. And anything that I think that we can do to contribute to that becoming less complex and more understandable for regular people is something that's certainly important for us to actually go ahead and do. I mean, just from my side, I think one of the things that mainly most people haven't thought about yet is that, sorry, hi to my sister-in-law, Silke, hi, is that it's not only the things like oil, gas, cereals, etc., that are being disrupted by this. It's all of the supply chains between Europe and Asia that are also being disrupted by this. So not only the air freight, but I think in Chinese ports, they've got 1 million containers that normally in the last month would have gone via rail through Russia. And they're now diverted to the ports. But because of the huge upswing in COVID cases, a lot of Chinese ports are closed. So you can imagine, where do you put 1 million containers? I mean,
that's
it's
crazy.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so moving a little bit away from the Ukraine, if you were to look back, knowing what you do now, what advice would you give your younger self starting out in the localization industry? And maybe as a second question to ask on top of that, what are the resources that you really wish that you'd had at that time? I mean, I know technology has moved on a lot in the last years, but what kind of things do you find most useful now?
So as far as the first part of the question, if I could give myself, my younger self, any advice, I would tell myself to relax. Everything was going to be okay in a lot better way than I'd ever could anticipate. But when I started in the Stone Age, in the pre.com era, nobody even had heard of the word localization, and translation was something companies did out of pure necessity once in a while when they really needed to. There was no real push for a global presence, at least not in the same way as we have it nowadays. We actually have dedicated positions, and there's a whole language service attached to it. So things have changed tremendously. I think there's a lot more opportunity for people starting out to get involved, and I would recommend young students that are in the process of getting involved in the language industry to get a LinkedIn account as soon as possible and become active on LinkedIn, which now is a full social media platform in the best way of social media, or in the best functions that a social media platform can fulfill. There's lots of opportunity to get involved and active in the community and network. You can start making connections right away. I, for example, run the Dallas Loc Lunch. Loc Lunch is a networking initiative that is organized by city, but you can join in from anywhere really. And once a month we get together on Zoom with anybody who's connected to the localization industry, is a prospective translator, or is looking to become a project manager, or people that are seasoned professionals on the client side join us as well. It's just an event that we organize that gives people an opportunity to get noticed and get involved. And before you know it, once you start networking and connecting with people and talking to them, before you know it, you meet a Catherine Reed and you get invited on her podcast to come speak. That's the way that works. It's really quite natural. So in the words of the famous Oscar Wilde, there is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. So here we are.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. And I know for sure that since I started to, let's say, extend my social circles on LinkedIn into the localization industry, I think Catherine Bussmann was my first contact in the industry. Then I've met so many people like yourself, and
We love Catherine. Catherine was a big influence for me as well. So we have that in common.
Exactly. And I really do think that these days also you have so many opportunities just to practice your languages that you wouldn't have had before. It's so easy to just pick up, to click on Zoom and talk to somebody. So yeah. Anyway, thank you, Stefan, for taking the time out of your morning to talk to me. Luckily,
we had a lovely conversation, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, I mean, luckily the US is already on daylight savings, so you won an hour longer first thing.
It wasn't too brutal.
It wasn't too brutal. It wasn't as brutal as I thought when I asked you if you could do this time. So yeah. Anyway, so thank you so much, and it's been lovely to talk. And thanks, guys, for watching on LinkedIn and on YouTube. If you're over on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. And if you're on LinkedIn, please also subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll drop the link afterwards in there as well. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.